Hey y'all, this is usually what my kitchen looks like during the month of August when I'm doing the Every Bit Counts challenge hosted by Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead. But sadly, I won't be joining in this year because we've moved into a new house and it's being remodeled. So I'm sharing lots of food preservation that I have done during the Every Bit Counts challenge over the years and giving you some tips and tricks also as well. So I hope you enjoy this video and seeing what I preserved over the years. I'm going to start off with some zucchini fritters. You could also do this with squash, but I'm just going to shred up some zucchini. This is perfect to use up some big fat zucchinis that you missed in the garden, but I'll have all the recipes linked down below in the description box. And I just put in some egg and some flour and some salt and pepper, and I'm going to fry them in the pan, and these are so good. So easy to make and just takes a few minutes, and it uses up a lot of zucchini. All right, I took some chuck roast from the freezer, so now I'm going to can these. I'm going to do a raw pack. So these are kind of like the ugly chicken, where you can just cut the meat up and put it in the jar with some salt. This is going to be really good because it'll cook in its own juices. But what I'm doing is just getting rid of some of the fat on here because you want to take away as much fat as possible. And you can do it in meat strips, cubes, or chunks, and I'm following in this recipe, but you can get the same thing on the University of Georgia website, and I will have that link down below so you can follow it exactly. So I'm going to get to cutting up these roasts, and then we'll come back. Okay, I got it all chopped up. There's not a whole lot of meat because I cut a whole lot of fat off of it. That's what happens when you've got a grass-fed beef that's got a lot of fat on it. So that's not going to go to waste. I'm going to take all these bones and roast them and make some broth with them. So I've got a half a teaspoon of salt in the jar. You don't want to pack it in the jar, but you want to make sure that all the air pockets are closed up so you don't get a whole lot of bubbles. I filled the jars to an inch headspace, and I didn't have enough for a whole quart or a whole pint, so I did a half a pint. You can go down in size but not up. I'm gonna put my lids and rings on, and we're gonna process this for 75 minutes. And this is the only time you can stage your jars, which is they're cold jars and you're putting cold meat in there. So you're gonna put them in some not really hot water, and that way you won't have any thermal shock. I'm gonna go ahead and hurry up and get these jars in there and process them for 75 minutes. As you can see, the meat made its own juices, so it's covering the meat, so that's going to be good, and it's going to be delicious poured over some rice or some mashed potatoes. And I did put some chicken in there with it. I had some chicken breast, and I had room in the canner, so I put some in there, and I'll do another load a little bit later. But I'm excited to try the beef. It came from a cow from my sister and her husband, and I know it's going to be really good. But then I took some pork that I had laid on a sheet tray, and I just flash froze it. So now I'm going to freeze those and add that to my freezer. I wanted to make sure I had plenty of green beans in the freezer, so I bought these and washed them really well, laid them on a sheet tray and froze them, and now I'm going to put them in the food saver and put them in the freezer. And I had some raisin bread that was in my cabinet for way too long, so I went ahead and laid that on the sheet tray, and I will put that in the freezer, and then that way I can use that for some French toast. And I also just took some regular bread and put that in the freezer too. That way I can either use it for French toast or I can use it for some breadcrumbs. Today I am going to pickle some peppers. I've got some jalapenos and banana peppers out of my garden, and I'm going to use both because I don't think these are hot, and maybe they will let the temperature go down just a little bit, but I doubt it. I think these are hot. I fermented these, some of the ones out of my garden, and they were really hot, but these will be great on some nachos or even some pizza. So I'm going to go ahead and get these chopped. This is 2 pounds. All right, y'all, I cut up my jalapenos, and I have got to read the directions better. Please read the directions better than me. I thought it said 2 cups or 2 pounds. It said 3 pounds. So I had to go out there in the garden and pick some more till I could have 3 pounds. So I've got 3 pounds here. I've cut up, I took some of the seeds out. I tried to get as much as I can out because these things are hot. I can just breathe around them and I can tell they're really hot. So I've got 3 cups here that are cut into pieces. All right, here is my brine. I've got 6 cups of vinegar and I've got 2 cups of water, and it called for 3 crushed cloves of garlic. So I've got that in there. I brought it to a boil and I simmered it for 5 minutes, and now I'm going to take the vinegar out. I'm going to take the garlic out, and then I'm going to start canning. I've got my jars here getting hot. I'm going to put the jalapenos in the jar, and then I'm going to put the brine over it. So wish me luck because these things are hot. I'm going to try not to get it on my hands. Okay, all my jars sealed, and I can't wait to use these on some nachos or some pizza. But I don't know about this recipe. It didn't have you cook the jalapenos in the brine for a few minutes, so they did float a little bit, but I think they're still going to be good. I found ground chuck at Food Line for $2.99, so I bought up what they had so I can can some ground beef. That is a very good price. I wish they had more, but I'm going to go ahead and can it for the very first time. I've never done it before. I didn't have time to can everything, so what I did was I just did it in advance, and I browned the ground beef, and I got my jars in the water, and I'm heating those up, and those are all the wide mouth, and I'm going to do a layer of the wide mouth on the bottom, and then I'll do a tray over the top of that, and then I'll put my smallmouth jars on the top because my canner won't fit the wide mouths on the top too, so I have to do the smaller ones on the top. And I'm canning mine 3 ways. You can either use a boiling broth, you can use boiling water, and you can use tomato juice. So I've got the boiling broth here, and I've got the water back there, and then I'm going to use the tomato juice. And I used filtered water. I didn't use the water from the sink. So make sure you're using filtered water if you're going to put that in your canning. So I'm just going to heat that up, and then we'll start the process. And the directions say that you're supposed to put the hot meat in the jar, but since I'm using the cold ground beef that I did it the night before, I'm just putting it in the tomato juice here and heating it up, and then I'll can it. I'll put the beef in there, and then I will put the liquid on top. Okay, I've got them stacked in my canner. I have got a rack in between, and I did find a couple more regular mouth jars, so I'm going to put the lid on there, and we're going to process these for 75 minutes. All right, it's the next day, and all my jars sealed. I'm going to use the ones with tomato juice with spaghetti sauce and chili, and I'm going to use the one with the beef broth for some soup, and I'm going to use the one in the water for some taco meat. All right, y'all, I am going to can some salsa today for the Every Bit Counts challenge. And I've got 2 pounds of tomatoes, plum tomatoes cut up. I've got 1 medium onion, finely chopped. I've got 2 minced jalapenos, 2 cloves of minced garlic, and 1/4 of a cup of fresh cilantro. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer it to this bowl, or to this pot. I'll put in some salt and some pepper and then some lime juice, and then we'll go to the next step. I'm using this recipe in this all new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving, and it's on page 162 and 163, and you can do different ones: corn and cherry, green tomato salsa verde, habanero tomatillo, mango chipotle, and I'm doing the tomato jalapeno. It said 6 limes for 1/2 cup, but I only needed 4, so I had some juicy limes. So I'm going to add that too as well. I did add pepper, but I just grinded some pepper in there. So, because I can't, I don't have, that's all I have, so I don't have any pepper to measure. So I am going to bring this up to a boil and reduce it and simmer it for 5 minutes. So I'm going to process these for 15 minutes. All right, y'all, I finally got my salsa done, and it looks really good. It looks just like I made it fresh, so I'm excited to try that. All right, y'all, I made a pepper tower. This is my new scale. I was weighing things on that digital scale that I had, and I had it on grams instead of pounds. So I went out and bought this thing so I can weigh properly. And it holds up to 22 pounds. And that's only 4 pounds right here. But we are making some cowboy candy, aka jalapeno or candied jalapenos. It's delicious on cream cheese. And I don't have enough jalapenos. And to tell you the truth, it's really hot. So I'm going to add some peppers, because when you're canning, a pepper is a pepper is a pepper. It doesn't matter what pepper you're using. You can substitute pepper for pepper, but you have to use the exact same amount. I've got some green peppers, I've got some red peppers, I've got some in between, and I've also got some banana peppers and also my jalapenos. So I'm going to cut all this up. 4 pounds is for the recipe. I almost just cut it in half and did 2 pounds, but I'm going to do the whole recipe because it's delicious, and I'm getting ready to use up the rest of what I made last year. So I have got 4 cups of sugar in my pot, and I have got 3 cups of apple cider vinegar. And I'm going to pour the vinegar into the sugar. I'm going to make the brine. Now, it said apple cider vinegar or white vinegar, but if I'm doing anything that's kind of sweet, I always put in the white vinegar. You could put in cider vinegar if you would like, but I like to make it a little bit less sweet if I can. Okay, I put the sugar, which is 4 cups of sugar. I put 3 cups of vinegar in here. The recipe calls for garlic. I'm not putting garlic in here. I don't really like garlicky sweet pickles. And I'm also not adding in the mustard seeds, but you could totally do that. And I will have the complete recipe link down below in the description box. I can't remember if I put turmeric in it last time I made them, but I'm going to put it in here. And I'm just going to heat that up. And I also put in 2 teaspoons of salt. I put in canning salt. So make sure you use canning salt in your canning recipes, or kosher salt. Don't use the iodized salt. All right, I'm just going to let that hang out and come up to a boil, and then we will come up to a boil, and then we will add our jalapenos, or our pepper mix is what I'm adding. Here's a batch of the cowboy candy from 9/21 that I'm going to open up today, because I'm like, as soon as I started making this, I'm like, that was so good. I need to make more of that because it's almost gone. So I'm going to open up a jar, and I've got some crackers here and some cream cheese spread. So I'm going to make one, or I'm going to make some because I'm starving. It's 12:30 and I haven't even eaten breakfast yet. So I'm going to put that on a cracker and eat some of it. And I'm pretty sure that I did put turmeric in it, because I can tell it's a yellowish color. So I'm going to open it up. Y'all, it is so good. You have got to try this. It's spicy, but it's sweet and it's delicious. So I hope you try it. Okay, my brine is boiling, and I'm going to add the peppers in there. And if you don't like spice at all, you could add totally all your peppers. Can be bell peppers. It could be green peppers, red peppers. Could be all banana peppers. You don't have to have this hot at all, but I am enjoying this jar right here that I made a couple years ago, and it's still delicious. So I highly recommend this recipe. And I am a spice wimp, but it's so good. All right, I'm gonna put these in here and let them cook for 15 minutes. All right, y'all, it's simmered for 15 minutes. And it says when the peppers get a little bit lighter green, which they are, they've absorbed that liquid. So now it's time to can it. So I can't wait. I'm going to use these little tiny half-pint jars. It says pints, so it says four pints. So I think I'll get 8 of these. So I'm just going to spoon them into the jars. And it says a 1/2 inch headspace. And then I'll put the lid and ring on, and we'll process these for 15 minutes. Today I'm going to make some chicken broth. I've got my roaster out, and I defrosted these 2 chickens. I've got them covered in salt and pepper, and then I'm going to add some other things to it and cover it with water, and we're going to cook it down and make some delicious organic chicken broth. All right, I covered it with water. I put some onions, celery, a bay leaf, and some peppercorns, and I'm going to cook this about all day. You could probably cook it 2 days if you'd like, but I'm just going to cook it until the chicken is nice and tender. I'll take that out and then we'll can up the broth. Y'all, I wish you could smell this. It smells like Thanksgiving in here. But you could just cook the chicken in there all day, or you could take the chicken out after, or chicken off the bone after a couple of hours and put the bones back in there and cook it for another day or so and have some more delicious bone broth. But I just cooked it for a couple of hours. I took the chicken off the bone and I've got the broth here, and I'm going to put it in the fridge so I can skim off the fat. So just however long you have it until the fat forms on the top, and then skim that off, and then you'll be ready to can it. Okay, it's been in the fridge, and now I'm just going to skim off this fat that has come up to the top. You don't want a whole lot of fat in your product to help to make it not seal. So I'm going to skim this off of the top, and it's really easy to do. It's just like a very solid layer, and just spoon that off, and then we'll be ready to heat the broth up and can it. Okay, I canned it for 20 minutes for pints, and isn't it gorgeous? I can't wait to use this in some soups and stews this winter. Next one, it is called Ugly Chicken, and it is really simple and easy if you don't have a whole lot of time. This is the easiest recipe you can do if you're just learning to pressure can. So I'm going to show you how to do it. It's really easy. You just cut up the chicken and put it in a jar. You don't have to add any liquid. It's really, really easy, and it's so delicious to have on your shelf. Anything that you have a recipe for shredded chicken, you can use that. And it makes the most delicious chicken salad. And also, if you're canning your own relish, that makes it even better too. Put it in enchiladas and a chicken pie. There's just so many things that you can do with this. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and show you how to make this ugly chicken. All right, I've got my jars nice and clean and washed in hot soapy water, and I've got a teaspoon or a half a teaspoon of salt in each one. You'll use a teaspoon if you're using quarts. And now I'm just going to put the chicken in there. I cut it up into cubes, and that little pieces of fat that's left, I'm going to save that and make some chicken broth with it, or add it to some chicken. And now I'm going to fill my jars. And you don't want to mash down really hard, but you want to press down a little bit and eliminate those little air pockets so you can get more chicken in there. And also you want a generous 1-inch headspace on there. So make sure you don't bring it all the way up to 1 inch, but you don't want to pack them down in there either. And then we'll just wipe the rim of the jar clean and put the washed lids and rings on there. And I've got more than is going to fit at the bottom, so I'm just going to take a rack. I've got an extra rack here, and I'm going to put that in the middle, and then I'll add the other jars at the top, and I'll pressure can these for 75 minutes in the pressure canner. And I don't know why they call it ugly chicken, but I think it's beautiful. All these jars are going to go on the shelf, and they're going to be so good in the wintertime. You've got to make these. If you don't make anything else in the pressure canner, you've got to make this chicken. It is so good and so easy to do. Today I'm going to ferment some salsa. I've just got everything chopped up in a bowl, and I will have the recipe linked down below in the description box. And I'm just going to put it in my jar. And I didn't have one of those tapper things, but I bought one after this. But I'm just going to try and mash it down so all that liquid will come to the top, because you do not want anything floating on top, and that could make mold. So we're going to try and bring all the juices to the top. All right, so now I'm just going to put the weights on, and then this will go on the top, and that little nipple right there has a little hole in there where it lets the air out, but it doesn't let anything in. And then I'm just going to screw the bands on top, and I'll stick them on top of my refrigerator. And I'll try one in 2 days and then one in 4 days, and we'll see how we like it. Okay, this is my fermented salsa that I fermented for 4 days. The other one was for 2 days, and it was still a little bit salty, but this one tastes a lot better than that one. So I think I'll go 4 days next time. Kind of forgot about it, but I'm glad I did, because this is really good. It's really good for your digestive system, your gut, because it's fermented. And also, you can put it in the fridge and it'll last for a month or so, but this probably won't last till the end of the day. Okay, I'm going to start on my barbecue sauce. I'm excited. I've never canned barbecue sauce before, but I've got my tomatoes washed, and I've got an X in them so I can peel them really easily, and I've got them in some boiling water, and as soon as the skins start to slip off a little bit, I'll put them in some ice water. And some of these tomatoes that I bought, these are the ones that I bought, and you do not want to use these that are kind of have like the yellow or the white stuff on there. They've been sitting there too long, and sometimes they have like a little soft spot. You don't want to use those for canning. You can use these for eating or for freezing if you want to cut them into pieces, but I don't can with these, especially the ones with the black spot. Even if you cut that off, it could still be all throughout the tomato, so you don't want to preserve that, but you can eat that. So okay, after I took the peels off, I took the cores out and quartered them up. Okay, I've got my tomatoes in a large pot. It calls for 3 cups of onions, so I am going to use my chopper here, and it says finely chopped, so I'm going to use the small blades, and I've got some of these onions from my garden that I'm going to chop up and use those up. It calls for 3 cups of finely chopped onions, so I'm using my Vidalia onion chopper. This thing is a miracle worker. You get out all your frustrations out, and plus it chops for you. Okay, I've already got 2 cups of onions in there, so all I'm going to do is add 1 more cup to make 3. Okay, I have my onions, my garlic, and my tomatoes in here, so I'm going to bring this up to a boil, and then I keep saying boil, I say boil. I'm going to boil this. I'm going to boil this for 30 minutes, and then we'll simmer it for a little bit until the vegetables get tender. Okay, after it simmered, I ran it through my KitchenAid and got it all nice and saucy. Okay, I have my strained tomatoes here. It calls for 2 cups of dark brown sugar. All I had was regular brown sugar, and I didn't have quite 2 cups, so I made my own. I just put in 1 cup of regular sugar and 1 tablespoon of molasses and made my own. So this is 1 cup right here. I'll get that out in a minute. And then here is my other cup. Put that in. These are my spices. I have salt. It called for garlic powder. I didn't have garlic powder, but there's garlic in there, so I put onion powder. It's got mustard and salt and paprika. And it called for smoked paprika, but all I had was regular. And it called for some chili powder or some kind of hot powder, but all I did was put some chipotle chili powder in there, and I just put a couple dashes because I don't want it really hot. So I'll have the complete recipe link down below, so I'll put all that down there. Calls for 1.5 cups of apple cider vinegar. The recipe called for bourbon, but all I had was some Seagram 7, so I just substituted that. All right, y'all, I've stirred it up, and you want to put it on the burner back again, and you're going to heat it to a boil. And you're going to let it boil, and then you're going to simmer it for 1.5 to 2 hours until it gets like a dark, rich color. I cannot wait. Okay, my sauce is ready. It's nice and thick, so I'm going to start canning it. This is a water bath, so it won't take but 20 minutes to do this. So it does take a while to make it, but it only takes 20 minutes to cook it, and it's going to be so delicious on your shelf in a couple months. I hope this barbecue sauce tastes as good as it looks. These are some beautiful jars, and they all sealed, so I'm going to check them in 12 hours. I'm going to make sure I check them and that they're sealed, and if they're not sealed, I can reprocess them, or I can just stick them in the refrigerator and use them in a couple months. So I'm excited to try this out. Today I'm making some oven roasted marinara. I've never made it before, so I'm excited to try it. Got lots of tomatoes here. I've got some here that I've weighed out. It calls for 20 pounds. So I've got these waiting. I've got these washed. Okay, I cut up my tomatoes and put them in the oven and roasted them, but make sure you use not use an aluminum pan, because I did that and the pan turned black. So make sure it's stainless steel or glass. All right, I've got 2 batches out of the oven, 2 more batches in, and now I've got a 1.5 cups of onions here that I've chopped, and I don't have any room because I can't put them in lengthwise, so I'm going to wait for those to come out, and then I will put these in there for 20 minutes. Okay, it's the next day, and I'm going to run these tomatoes that I roasted last night through the food mill. I've got 2 bowls of these. I'm going to start on this one. All right, y'all, this is the aftermath. It looks like a tomato bloodbath. I've got tomatoes all over the place. Okay, I ran the tomatoes through the KitchenAid strainer, and now I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients. I added a cup of dry red wine. I thought it smelled so good, but then I tasted it and it kind of tasted like rubbing alcohol to me, but it still smelled good. All right, and then I'm going to add a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of oregano. It calls for 6 cloves of garlic, but my garlic was bad, so I went ahead and just substituted garlic powder. I also added some black pepper, and it did call for 2 bay leaves, but of course I only had 1. Okay, I also cooked it down for a couple of hours to get it to a thicker consistency, and I did add in onions. I forgot to show you that, and then I've simmered it for a couple of hours. So now I'm going to add half a cup of lemon juice. I've got my jars over here heating up. I've got 8 pints. You can use quarts, but I'm just getting those jars heated up, and I'm going to get everything ready to start canning it. Okay, y'all, first project today is some bread and butter pickles. I've got 10 cups of cucumbers, 4 medium onions, 1/2 cup of canning and pickling salt, and I put over the top. And then I covered it with some filtered water, and I'm going to put it in the refrigerator and let it sit for about 2 hours. And then we'll bring it out, let those sit and drain. While it drains, I'm going to work on the brine. It's 3 cups of white vinegar, 2 cups of granulated sugar, 2 tablespoons of mustard seed, 1 teaspoon celery seed, and 1 teaspoon of ground turmeric. I've got everything mixed together, and I'm going to go ahead and stir it and bring it to a boil. Now I've got all the water drained off, so now I'll put it back in the brine. I brought it up to a boil, and now it's time to fill the jars. It said a 1/2 inch generous headspace, so I'm going to fill the jar with the cucumbers and onions, and then fill it up to 1/2 inch headspace with the brine. Then I'll get all the air bubbles out, and then I'll wipe the rim of the jar to make sure there's nothing going to interfere with the seal, and then I'll put them back in the canner. Okay, I've got 9 beautiful jars of these bread and butter pickles. I cannot wait to open up a jar. I have this crock that my sister gave me, so I'm going to try and ferment some of these pickles whole. I love a good whole pickle, so I will have that recipe and the brine recipe linked down below in the description box. All it said was to cut the blossom end off, so I washed the crock really good, and I've stacked my cucumbers in there, and then I'm going to pour that brine over the top. It's just salt and water. I mixed it up in the mason jars, and I'm just going to pour it over the cucumbers and make sure that it is covering every bit of the cucumbers. You don't want it floating up to the top. I did put some dill in there from my herb garden, but I didn't have enough dill. I would put that, or you could, or even put more seeds in those. I didn't put as much as I probably should have, and I didn't have any garlic, so I would put garlic in there too. And I'm just covering it up to the top and adding my glass weights in there. You want everything way down. You don't want anything up above the brine. And on this one, you can put the water right there, and it makes a seal. So I'm just going to put the lid on there, and I'm going to wait probably 3 or 4 days, and then we'll try one. Okay, these are after 5 days. These were amazing. They were still crunchy, even though they really needed some more garlic flavor and some more dill in there. This is something I will definitely do again. Today's project is some spaghetti sauce, and I'm just washed my tomatoes and scored them on the bottom of them so they will peel really easily when I put them in the boiling water. And these are some beautiful heirloom tomatoes that I bought. I sadly didn't grow these, but I've got some boiling water here, and I'm just going to put the tomatoes in the boiling water, and then I'll take them out after about 30 to 40 seconds and put them in an ice bath so they'll cool off really fast. Okay, I removed the peels, I took out the core, and I chopped them into quarters, and now I am going to boil them for 20 minutes uncovered, and then I'm going to run them through the food mill. Okay, after the tomatoes cook, I let them cool a bit, and then I ran them through the KitchenAid strainer, and I used my measuring cup to catch all the seeds and peels, and it goes through there and gets all that stuff out, and it leaves you with some gorgeous sauce. Okay, I'm going to saute the vegetables. I've got a pound of mushrooms, a cup of chopped green pepper, 5 cloves of garlic, 1 cup of chopped onion, and I've got 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, and I'm going to just cook those until they're tender. All right, now that my vegetables are all softened, I'm going to add that back to the tomato sauce. Now I'm going to add the remaining ingredients: 4½ teaspoons salt, 2 tablespoons oregano, 4 tablespoons minced parsley, 2 tablespoons black pepper, and 1/4 cup brown sugar. And then I'm just going to mix that together. All right, then you just want to bring that to a boil, and then you'll simmer it until it gets reduced by half. And that takes a long time, but don't cover it up. Just let it cook uncovered until you like the consistency. If you like a thinner sauce, you can cook it longer, but this took about 4 or 5 hours. All right, it took about 4 hours, but now it is reduced by half, so now we're going to can it. Okay, I've got my jars hot and ready. I usually use quart jars or pint jars, but for sauces, I always do a quart, and especially with spaghetti sauce. So I'm using a quart jar. My jars are hot and ready. I've got my funnel, and I like to take my measuring cup because it's got that spout on it, and I think it makes it a lot easier to put the sauce in there. Okay, so I'll leave a 1-inch headspace. I'll get all the air bubbles out with my tool there and wipe the lid clean. Okay, I pressure can these for 25 minutes since they're quarts. You can also do pints for 20 minutes. 4 quarts and a half pint out of that, and I also canned some Mexican corn, and that's in another video, and I'll have that linked down in the description box. All right, when you peel your tomatoes, don't throw them away. Put them in a baggie and put them in the fridge, and when you're ready, just put them on the dehydrator, because that's what I'm going to do. I just did drain them out a little bit so they wouldn't be so wet where they would dry a little bit faster. So I'm just going to load them on my dehydrator, and about 24 hours, they'll be nice and dry, and I can put them in a jar, or I can powder them up and make some tomato powder. All right, now I'm going to can some bone broth. I've got these beef bones out of the freezer, and I'm going to put them on a tray and bake them at 400 for about 30 minutes. Okay, the bones are out. So I turned the oven down to 225. Now I'm going to take all these bones and the drippings and put them in my pan here. I even scraped down the pan with this and got a lot more off of that pan so I can have all those delicious juices in here. All right, I have 2 bay leaves. Bay leaves? Can't talk. I added 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay, I'm putting, it calls for 1 large onion. I don't have 1 large onion. I've got like 3 smaller onions, so that's what I put in there. And 3 cloves of crushed garlic. I know this is going to be so good. I mean, how can it go wrong with all these delicious flavors? All right, I think we're ready to go in the oven. This sounds just as good as it looks, y'all. Can you just hear that? Okay, so what I did was I browned the bones in the oven. I cooked it for 8 hours on 220, and then I cooked it for 8 more hours at 180. So I did up the temperature just a little bit while I went out to the garden. So now it's ready to go to the next step. So what I'm going to do is strain it all out. So I'm going to remove the bones and run it through a strainer or a colander and get some of the big chunks out. Y'all, that is some beautiful broth right there, but it's got a lot of fat in it. So what I'm going to do is put it in the refrigerator and let it sit until all that fat congeals, and it'll make a solid form on the top, and then we'll take that off, and then we'll heat it up and can it. Okay, I had it in the refrigerator for a couple of hours, and the fat just peels right off, but I'm not going to throw that away. I'm going to save that and maybe roast some potatoes in there, and that is going to be so delicious. But I'm just going to take this fat off, and I'll heat it up, and then we can can it. Just look at it. It looks like a big, beefy bowl of Jell-O. And it's gelatinous like that, you know it's going to be good. All right, I'm going to cook this up or heat it up. You want at least 2 quarts, so if you don't have 2 quarts, you can add enough water to make it 2 quarts. So I had to add a little bit more filtered water, and I have got 4 jars heating up. I'm just using pints, but you can use quarts if you'd like, and I've got that heated up in my canner. You want to pressure can this in a pressure canner. It's time to can it up, and I broke my measuring cup, so I'm having to use the glass Pyrex one that I bought on Amazon, so I hope I don't break that, so I've got to be really gentle with that. But I'm just going to fill this up to 1-inch headspace, and then I'll get out all the air bubbles, and then I'll wipe the rim of the jar and get these canned up. It only made 3 jars, but you have to have 4 when you're pressure canning, so I just took one of the jars and took an old lid and put some water in there, so that way I'll have some sterilized water on my shelf if I need it. But I just pressure canned this for 20 minutes, and it was beautiful. And I've got 3 jars, and all 3 of them sealed. So I can't wait to open up a jar of this to make some soup during the winter time. I've got 8 cups of cucumbers. I've got 2 cups of onions, 2 cups of peppers, and 2 cups of red and 2 cups of green peppers. So now I am going to add 1/4 of a cup of salt over it. Then I'm going to cover it with cold water and let it sit for 2 hours. And then we'll be back. All right, y'all, I've got this draining in the sink. I used that in the other pot so that way I could take this out and let all the water drain off. And then I rinse the other pot out and I'll use that for the brine that I'm going to use. All right, y'all, I've got my vinegar and sugar in here and also some celery seed and mustard seed. So I'm just going to heat this up to boiling, and then we'll put our vegetables in there and let it simmer for 10 minutes. All right, y'all, it's been simmering for 10 minutes. So about ready. Got my jars in here, heating up. And then I'll get all the air bubbles out and make sure that I've got a 1/2 inch of headspace. Then I'll take my wet paper towel and wipe the rim of the jar so nothing will mess with the seal. And then I'll process each jar for 10 minutes. All my jars sealed, and this is going to make the most delicious potato salad, tuna salad, and it makes the best chicken salad. And I also had some brine left, and I cut up some cucumbers, and I made some refrigerator pickles. I got some green beans cleaned up from my garden, and I'm just going to lay them on this sheet tray and just freeze those in a layer, and then I'll food save them when I get those frozen. And then I'm going to take these Anaheim chilies and I'm going to cut the seeds out, and I'm going to blister these on both sides under the broiler. And that way I can put those in the freezer and have some green chilies. So I'm just going to make sure that I get them all blackened on each side. And now I'm going to take them and put them in a bowl, and then I'll cover it with some plastic wrap and let it steam, and it will loosen that charred stuff on the outside, and then we can peel them really easy. And then I'll just take them and I'll clean them up really good and put them in some individual freezer bags, and then that way I can just put them in one large freezer bag and I can just get out the individual sizes, and I don't have to have them in one big block. Here are some peppers that were kind of going bad and getting soft, so I just chopped them up, and I'm going to dehydrate these. And I had to use gloves because I've got some jalapenos on there and some Anaheim, and I don't know how hot they are. But I did cut a tiny little piece in those gloves, so I had to buy some more gloves. But I'm chopping these peppers up, and I'm also going to chop up some onions. And these were from the garden, but they're not going to store because they had little bits chipped out of them, so they're not going to store really a long time. So I'm going to cut those up and chop them up and make them into onion powder, but I know I'm just going to chop them up into pieces for right now. So I'll just dry those for about a day, and now they're dried, so I'm going to take them and put them in these jars. I've got one of these spice jars that I saved, and it's going to go perfect for those onions. And if I want to, I can make them into a powder, or I can just add these into soups and stews, or however I want to use them. Today I'm going to make one of my favorite pickled beets. I've already prepared the beets, and now I'm going to make up the brine. It's just 4 cups of vinegar. It's got 1.5 teaspoons canning and pickling salt, 2 cups sugar, 2 cups water. It does call for cinnamon sticks and cloves, but I don't add that. And it also calls for 4 to 6 onions. So I'm just going to mix up that brine. And I just cooked my beets and in water until they were softened, and then I peeled them. And now I'm just going to add the beets and the onions together with that pickling brine after I brought it to a boil. And now it's time to start canning. And it's very messy, so you want to make sure that you've got your counters covered up. I always make sure I cover them up with paper towels. And I also add a bowl underneath my jar, that way that it will catch all the mess, because pickled beets are messy anyway, and it can stain everything. And also, I'm messy, so I want to make sure that I've got all my bases covered. Okay, I'm just putting on my lid and ring, and I'm going to process these for 30 minutes in a water bath canner. And I've tried these beets, not using pickle beets, just making regular beets, and I didn't like them as much. These are some of our favorite things to can and to eat. Okay, I saved the best for last. This is the most delicious freezer pickle you will ever have. It's so crunchy, and even if you don't put them in the freezer, they're still delicious. Half of mine didn't get to the freezer. We ate them all before we got them in the freezer, but I want to share with you this delicious recipe. It's so easy to make. You just take 7 cups of cucumbers, 1 large onion, 1 tablespoon pickling salt, a half a teaspoon of celery seed, 1 cup white vinegar. It calls for 2 cups of sugar, but I only use 1, but you can use 2 if you like it a little bit sweeter. And just mix it up and put it in the refrigerator and stir it every day. And then after 3 days, they're ready for the freezer. And I love these containers. I got them from Amazon, and I'll have them linked in the description box. But they're just perfect for these pickles. And just fill it up with brine and put the lid on, and you've got some delicious pickles.